Hello, good evening, everybody. Hi, I'm Flavia from Seneca. Before we do anything, can you all please confirm that you can hear me? So please just type yes on the chat if you can hear me. It's gonna wait 20 seconds till YouTube start. Yes, brilliant. Okay, good. So now type hello if you can hear Kristian saying something. Kristian, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you all here tonight.
So type hello if you could hear him okay. Yes, waiting for a few hellos. Brilliant. Fantastic. So everything is working. You can see my screen. So now we can start. So thank you so much for being here today on our last CPD of the year, or at least the last Seneca CPD of the year. So thank you so much for being here after school. It's really nice to see everybody so interested on data and progress data, attainment data, and how we can make the best use of that. So we have a schedule today. So the whole thing is gonna last 1 hour. You will be getting a certificate in the end. I'm gonna tell you everything about that. And you'll also be getting a discount code for Seneca Premium if you're ever interested on buying Seneca Premium. So let's just gonna do a very quick presentation here. So important information about today, again, before we get started with any of the real presentation, just some very important information. We are doing a live broadcast on YouTube. So every interaction is going to happen via the chat. So for example, we can start. I know a lot of people have done this already, but let's start with you saying your name, your subject, and your region, also your role if you want, if you're a head of department or senior leader. So we get to know each other, but everything will happen on the chat. So you can type your questions, you can type comments, you can ask questions, you can answer questions, you can share resources, everything that you want to do it via the chat. Kristian and I will be keeping an eye on the chat, mostly me because he will be presenting. And then every comment, every question that you ask during the presentation, I will ask him in the end. So we're gonna have me giving this introduction, the presentation, and then Q&A, which is usually the most exciting part because we get to really talk to each other. So make sure you use the chat. The more interaction, the better. So ask your questions, make comments, share resources, do anything. Obviously, be polite, but share as much as you want and interact as much as you can. We also on Twitter. So if you want to share this, whatever you're thinking with even more people, you can go on Twitter. And then we're using the hashtag Seneca CPD on Twitter. So if you ever want to tweet anything about today, use that hashtag so that other people can find other people who are also talking about the event. Kristian has authorized us to screenshot the slides. So if you see something that you find really cool, you can take a screenshot and then share on Twitter and type your comments on there. And these are the main accounts that you will be tagging, mostly those two, this if you want to. But so this is Seneca. So at Seneca Learn, that's Seneca account. That is Kristian's account. So make sure that you tag those two. And this is me. If you want to tag me, feel free to, but don't have to. But that's me. And I am, you might have talked to me before if you are using Seneca already, but I am the chief scientist at Seneca. So I'm responsible for all the methodology, everything that has to do with making sure that Seneca's methodology is based on cognitive science and evidence-based research. Okay, so that's just some basic information. Let me get rid of this. Okay, so the schedule is this. So 5 minutes of me just giving you an overview about everything. And then we're gonna have the main talk. Then I will give you the discount code. So the discount code will be shared between the talk and the Q&A. And I will explain you how you can redeem that. And then in the end, we're gonna have time for questions and comments. Okay, so you remember when you signed up on Eventbrite, there was a question asking you if you already use Seneca or not. And 55% of you said that you do not use Seneca. You do not know what Seneca is, or you haven't heard of it. So that's why I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of what it is. If you do use Seneca, maybe you learn something new about it. If you don't, then make sure you check our website because it's really cool. I've been with Seneca since 2017, and I really like working here because we provide something that's really amazing to teachers and students all over the world, not even just England. So, but again, that's very quick because I know that you're here for the data bit with Kristian. But let's go. So, Seneca is an adaptive learning platform that uses neuroscience and data science to improve learning. So, we create this fun, effective system, all adaptive, all interactive, that really boosts students' achievement. There was a research done last year by the EduReal Institute here in the UK about different platforms that were used during lockdown. And you can see Seneca here. We had 99% of approval of staff. So we were really happy about that we really helped so much during lockdown. But Seneca is not only remote learning. We actually started in 2018, and we have over 6 million, 6.5 million people using Seneca now. So it works during lockdown. Hopefully we won't get back to lockdown, but it also works in normal in-person learning, which is as a homework and revision platform that you can use with your students. So we have content. See if that works. Yes. So we have content all the way from primary to A level. GCSE and A level contents all exam board specific. So you have AQA chemistry, you have OCR chemistry, etc. And it's all written by senior examiners. I will share this PowerPoint presentation with you after the talk. So if you click on the green buttons here, then you'll be able to explore more of what it says on the slide. And we have global, I think I skipped something. We have global recognition. So Seneca has been recognized by the Department for Education, the BBC, several different organizations and associations of subjects and school groups. And we also won the Global Impact Award last year, which was pretty cool. So there was I'm not going to go into too much detail here, although it is data, but I'm just going to skip just for the sake of time. But we did have a randomized control trial with over 1,000 students conducted and published in a peer-reviewed journal. And what we saw was that students who use Seneca get up to 2 times better grades than students who do not use Seneca. And that's mostly because of how our methodology is entirely based on cognitive sciences, on the brain, how it works, how people learn, how people forget, how people don't learn. And it's all adaptive, it's all interactive. Okay, so the student platform is a personalized and differentiated learning system. So we have an algorithm, we have an artificial intelligence, if you want, that keeps track of each student's answers and then selects new questions for each of them. So basically creates a different learning path for each student that's differentiated, interactive, personalized, and it really optimizes learning. So we have like scientific evidence that this improves learning. And again, if you click on the green links, you're going to find out more about that. And the main principles of neuroscience, of cognitive science that we use, retrieval practice, spacing, and dual coding. Also students' own data, so we know how each student is behaving on Seneca, and then we adjust the platform to each of them. And then in terms of teachers, we also have a teacher platform. And the good thing about the teacher platform is that it's all self-marked. So you can set assignments to your students, everything self-marked, and then you get data. So I know Kristian will be talking about data. You're all here for data, but we provide you with a lot of data about your students. So you can see data about, sorry, you just gotta go. You can see data about each student, each class. If you're a head of department, about your whole, all the different teachers and classes in your department. If you're a senior leader, you can see data about each class, each department, each year group. You can see different target groups. So if you have pupil premium or English as an additional language, you can see how each group is progressing on Seneca. So it's really good data, really good information that you can use to identify best practices and also areas that are in need of intervention. So it's all on the teacher platform, and that allows you to have this differentiated view on your students. And also obviously reduces workload because you don't have to prepare the assignment and you don't have to mark the assignment. It's all done for you. We also have a parent platform, which is brand new. We actually just launched this updated version this week, I think, or last week. I'm not going to go into details here, but it's a really good way for parents to keep track of what their kids are doing as well. And it's all free for you to use on Seneca, or for them to use on Seneca. Okay, so in terms of data, like I said, this is something new as well that we developed during the pandemic, but you can actually sync your school's management system, so your MIS, with Seneca. And that means that all of the accounts, all the student accounts, all the teacher accounts are automatically created. All the classes are automatically set up, and then everything is kept up to date. And that's how you get to see everything that's happening in your whole school. So every department, every year group, every student, every teacher, every department, every target group, every year group, every key stage, every subject, everything is available for you. So you have infinite data to understand what's going on in your school and help you to develop intervention and more effective ways of teaching and learning. Okay, so yeah, I'm not going to play this obviously, but on this YouTube channel that you are here to watch Kristian's talk, we also have a playlist that's called Onboarding Webinars. So if you go on that playlist, you see tutorials where we explain how to get started on Seneca. So you have never been on Seneca before, check out that playlist. It's just a very quick overview. And then go on senecalearning.com and give it a try. It's all free. Not all, but most of it is free. Some of the things are paid because they cost us money, so we have to charge. But most of the things are free for students, for teachers, and for parents. And just to finish, that's the code. Okay, so some things are paid, but I can give you a discount. So obviously, go on Seneca. This is the website. I'm gonna put it on the chat here as well. So most of the things are free, but some of the things are paid. So the MIS integration is paid because the SIEMs, ABO, etc. They charge us to integrate and to synchronize with them. So that's why we cannot just do it for free, unfortunately. But we are able to give you a discount because you came for this talk here today. So after Kristian's done with his presentation, I will give you a code, so you can get a better quote on your premium Seneca. Okay, so that's it. If you have any questions about Seneca, feel free to type and I'm gonna answer them in the end so we don't spend too much time on this. But hopefully you all gonna have a look on senecalearning.com because like I said, most of it's free. We have 6 million people using it, all exam board specific, all based on neuroscience, and you have a million different data points that you can obtain from Seneca about each of your students. Cool. So let's start with Kristian now. I'm gonna let you introduce yourself so that I don't spend more time talking. Make sure to ask all of your questions and just type all of your comments in the chat. Okay, see you later. Enjoy your talk.
Hi, good evening, everybody. It's great that so many people have come to join and listen to me talk about this this evening. It's brilliant that there's people from some very far-flung locations. I've seen people saying they're coming in from the Bahamas and from Slovenia and from Nigeria, California. I think I saw somebody. But also some people that are much closer to home as well. I'm based in Leeds. I did see one person from Bradford. So a shout out as well to anybody in the West Yorkshire crew here tonight. So my talk is all about using progress and assessment data. I've titled it Avoiding Bad Data and Letting the Score Take Care of Itself. If you follow my Twitter feed, you'll know that my sort of education comments are sometimes interspersed with a lot of American football comments, because I'm a big American football fan, particularly a fan of the San Francisco 49ers and the great coach of that organisation from the 1980s was a guy called Bill Walsh. And he wrote this book, The Score Takes Care of Itself, My Philosophy of Leadership. And I think it's all about trying to get this, if we can get the processes right, the data that we're trying to work towards, in their case, the score, we'll sort that out if our processes are good. My contention around data is that some of our processes haven't been all that good over the time I've been in teaching. I've been in teaching since 2007. I trained at the University of York. I've taught in schools. I did my NQT year in Birmingham, but then moved up to Leeds. And I've taught in Leeds for nearly a decade. And then more recently, I've moved to a school in North Yorkshire as head of history. But I've also been a senior leader previously as well. And I've also held other roles, other middle leadership roles in other posts that I've worked in. So I've got a range of experience of dealing with data of various different shapes and sizes. But I hope as a historian, rather than perhaps with all due respect to mathematicians and scientists who tend to dominate this field, and you sort of look in a lot of schools, and the person who's the assistant head teacher in charge of data is often a scientist or a mathematician. And I hope as a historian, I'll be able to come at this in a way that won't be too intimidating statistically, and will hopefully be fairly accessible. I should also point out, and as I did in a Twitter thread earlier, that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants who've really informed my thinking on this, and I'll refer to some of those as we go along. I wanted to start with this quote from the brilliant blog by a head teacher called Matthew Evans. I think he's at head_teach. And his blog, this was one he wrote within the last week, and it was titled Getting the Measure of a School. I thought it was very appropriate for this theme. And it says that in schools, we have an uneasy relationship with measurement. On the one hand, measurement is problematic, as the things we value in education do not often lend themselves to measurements, and the things we can measure distort our values. We want to know if children are learning, but when we attempt to measure this, we affect what and how they are taught. We want to know if children are being taught well, but can only do this by inventing proxy measures. On the other hand, without measurement, we leave education to chance, not knowing what practice may offer a better education. We can hope that every student falls in love with our subject, but it is hopelessly romantic to believe this is all we should aim to achieve. In walking this line, it is hardly surprising that we make mistakes. It's a brilliant blog, and I urge you all to go and check it out if you give his Twitter page a browse. And I think that really sums up the problem with progress and assessment data in schools as we try to use it to inform what we're doing, is that we have to collect data. Data is really important to what we're doing, but a lot of the data we collect is flawed in lots of ways, and is problematic in lots of ways, and is often misunderstood. And hopefully we'll be able to think a bit more about some of those issues this evening. My structure for my presentation is as follows. I'm going to talk a bit about the data deluge that you might find yourself in, and particularly I'm coming at this from the perspective of a middle leader. That's my current role. I'm a head of department in an 11 to 18 school, and that's my lens for this, although, as I say, I can speak a little bit to other lenses that you might apply to this topic. I'm going to talk about the problem of bad data that we encounter, and what are some of the issues with the data that we have to deal with in education, and get us to think about that, and get us to be a bit more critical and a bit more questioning and a bit more uncertain about the data that we use. We'll think a little bit about what data do we really need as teachers, as middle leaders, and perhaps as senior leaders as well, although I'm perhaps a little bit less qualified to speak on that score. And I'll also talk very briefly about how I use data in my current role, and in perhaps in previous role as well. And there'll hopefully be an opportunity, if I don't rabbit on too much, for some questions at the end. So I'm sure all of us, particularly if you're working, and again, I'm conscious that there's an international audience, but if you're working in an English school, particularly if you've interviewed for a middle leadership job or a senior leadership job, if you're working in any of those type of roles, probably even if you're a classroom teacher in an English school, you will be familiar with something like you can see on the background here, which is a spreadsheet full of coloured numbers and letters, and obviously that that's sort of quite intrinsic to a lot of what we feel, or it seems to be quite intrinsic to a lot of what we're doing. Undoubtedly, if you've interviewed for any of those jobs, you will almost certainly have been given a data task to do as part of that interview. You'll be given a whole range of, depending on the role, maybe department level or school level data, and you'll be expected in an hour to turn around some sort of analysis of that data, identifying the strengths and weaknesses and identifying some action points for improvement. I frankly would hope in the future that when it comes to doing my exam review, that they give me the same format, because then it would force me to only spend about an hour on it rather than the 3 or 4 hours that I sometimes spend on these things to try and do the best that I can. It would save me a bit of time. But there we are. So this will be very, very familiar to us. And again, I'm not going to sit here and, although I'm critical of some of these spreadsheets, I'm not going to sit here and say I don't have them myself for my own department. I do have spreadsheets that I do use as well. And certainly, getting your head around Microsoft Excel a little bit is certainly something to be recommended. I'll just try and illustrate the data deluge that I'm referring to, that can lead us to be pulled in all sorts of different directions and can sometimes muddy the waters a little bit for us. If you start in a job as a head of department, you'll probably find straight away, certainly if you're starting in September, you'll have your exam results to analyse of the previous year's cohort. Obviously, pandemic aside, although you may still find that you're analysing teacher assessed grades. I know that's been done. I've had to do that as well. And you'll probably have to put together some sort of review, and there's probably some sort of meeting that you'll have to have with your head teacher or your line manager perhaps, or the deputy head teacher in charge of standards, or whatever. So obviously that's critical, because that's ultimately the students' actual outcomes that they're leaving with. So it's obviously very important that we are thinking about those grades and what's happened with those results. Particularly, if you're coming into a department where there's been some problems, you've obviously got to try and get to the bottom of what some of those issues are. You'll find probably that as part of that, you'll have lots of data by various different subgroups. So you'll have the pupil premium students versus the non-pupil premium students. You'll have the students who have EHCPs or are marked as SENDK versus non-SEND special educational needs students. Again, sorry to clarify, if you're not in an English school, PP is pupil premium. These are students who basically have been in receipt of free school meals over the last 6 years. So they're sort of disadvantaged is another label that's used for this group. You may be looking at your students who have English as an additional language. Your boy versus girl gender splits, probably also thought about almost invariably with a view to trying to think about why boys aren't doing quite so well as girls. Often, but not always, that's the case. You'll probably also have data by different teaching groups. You'll have to evaluate the performance of teachers in your department. You may have different groups. These may be mixed ability classes, as I would deal with in history, certainly in the schools that I've worked in. But if you're a head of English or maths, you might have setted groups, or depending on your school structure, you might have setted groups to deal with, and that can be really challenging, and it's really important to get your head around there, of course, that bottom set classes with low retaining students are probably less likely to achieve as well on progress measures as those in high retaining classes as well, and to be aware of that when it comes to evaluating those colleagues. As you go through the year, you will then have all sorts of internal assessments that you'll be doing. You'll have to track this. You'll probably have your own spreadsheets and records of tracking that you'll have to record. This might be something that then you discuss with your line manager in perhaps fortnightly line management meetings. You'll have to set up internal assessments and make sure they're fit for purpose, and that's quite challenging. Assessment is a really complex field in itself. If you're not an expert on assessment, it could be quite hard to do this well. At some point, you'll probably have some mock exams that you'll have to deal with, or PPEs, as I know they're called in some schools, pre-public exams. So these are exams sort of as practice before the real ones at the end of year 11 or the end of year 13. And you may well have to do a similar process as you did with your actual exam results, with your mock exam results, that you analyze those, break it down by different subgroups and so on and so forth as well. You will probably then have to engage in lots of action planning and intervention. And that could be at all year groups, not obviously not just year 11 or year 13, but perhaps year 7, 8 and above. Again, in primary school, if there's any primary colleagues here, I'm sure, again, very similar processes for you, although I can't speak to that as much. But you will almost certainly have to do some, identifying the groups that are underperforming, the students that are underperforming, identifying reasons for that, and then probably putting in place some intervention based on that as well, whether that's in class or whether that's through some sort of after-school intervention that your school might provide and create the time for you to do. You will, of course, have to grapple with data at different key stages. So if you've got A-level in your school, you'll have to grapple with things like the level 3 value added and the ALICE data, perhaps, if your school uses that. Obviously, key stage 4, we have the national measures for that, and you may well need to grapple with things like Fisher Family Trust and the sort of target data that sort of projects forward what students of your attainment profile should be getting, or what they would get if they were in a top 20% school in the country, for example. And key stage 3, of course, as well, and this is even more complicated because schools are running, because there is no centralized key stage 3 data system. There is no key stage 3 level system anymore. Different schools are running very, very different approaches. And if you're moving from one to the other, that can be a real transition as well to get to grips with that. And of course, you have lots of other data as well that has an impact on progress and achievement. There's a whole host of pastoral data out there. You'll probably be asked at various points in the year to look at behaviour referrals, for example. You have attendance data that can be very interesting and very useful. Things like data on student reading ages, so other data, external data that potentially can be produced about students that might be informative as well. This can all be really helpful to us and give us real insights into students and what they're likely to achieve and what they have been doing. And the point of this is, it's overwhelming, isn't it? I think about the implications for colleagues of this. This is an overwhelming task. There's a huge quantity of numbers to get to grips with here. And it can feel very, very intimidating. And I think it can make the role of curriculum leader and the role of head of department, however it's worded in your school, it can make it feel like all you do is grapple with numbers and grapple with spreadsheets, because surely that's all you can do other than teach your lessons and mark books, given the amount of stuff there is to get to grips with. And I think in the past in schools, there has been a really, in some schools, an unhealthy culture around data where that has been the role of the curriculum leader, has been to be the data bod for their department. And I think that this is something that I would urge us to think carefully about whether that's something that's desirable. And particularly, and again, Ofsted shouldn't necessarily be the driver of these things, but it often is the driver of these things. But in a world where curriculum is our big focus now, or has become a big focus, I know it's been a focus for lots of people prior to Ofsted taking an interest in it, that then perhaps offsets this overwhelming focus on data. Ofsted have said we're not interested, or not quite so interested in internal tracking data as we might have been in the past. But we know that the urge to keep on fixating on data is still there in lots of places. So my contention is that a lot of this data that we get, not only is there far too much of it in some cases for us to know what to do with, a lot of the data that we have is flawed in a number of ways and for a number of reasons. I'm going to try and get into that now. So I'm going to talk a bit about the problem of bad data. I've got 4 problems. Problem number 1 is the flaws of data at the level of your department. And again, I'm thinking about this from that middle leader hat on. And I think there are flaws in 2 main ways. One are the flaws of data that you might encounter that have been produced by your department. And as a middle leader, and there may well be aspiring middle leaders in this session. It'd be brilliant if there are. This is something that you might well be confronted with straight away, particularly if you're coming into a department that's struggled. You might find that you have a department where the predictions have been off. Obviously, I'm sure most of us are asked at some point to predict, what do we think the students are going to achieve, and there can be, in some places, they've been known to be significant consequences for people where predictions have been wildly out of line with what has been achieved. And in some ways, that's not unreasonable. We ought to know where students are, But we also need to be mindful of the fact that predicting grades is a very inexact science, and particularly in some subjects. If I skip ahead here, if we look at subjects, the ones down the bottom there, and I'm being biased probably as a history teacher, but history's down there with English, business studies, sociology, these subjects where there is a lot of writing involved. What we find, and what this graph shows us, this was from a report produced by Ofqual around the accuracy of marking. And basically that the subjects down the bottom are those subjects where the marking is less likely overall to be accurate, where you are less likely to find that the grade that your student has been awarded, or the mark on a paper that your student has been awarded, corresponds with what they would have got had the chief examiner been marking that paper, or a senior examiner been marking that paper. So, in history, English, lots of a small number of large writing questions. There's a huge potential for subjectivity. Subjects like maths, clearly, is there's far less scope potentially for subjectivity there. You also might encounter problems with your department's internal assessments. And again, this is unsurprising. Designing assessment is difficult. Designing assessment requires a lot of specialist knowledge to do it well, to do it in robust ways. I'd highly recommend, as a starting point, checking out Adam Robbins's book, Middle Leadership Mastery, which is a really good accessible chapter on leading assessment, and get you to think about some of the principles of assessment design. But you might find that there's all sorts of problems. A common problem is the conflation of summative and formative assessment. Using summative assessments formatively is a real and common problem. So things like, for example, a mock exam or an end of unit test that is a summative assessment, and we might try and use that in a formative way, but in doing so we infer incorrect things, or we make mistakes in the inferences that we draw from that. So, this can be obviously, again, something that's going to be kind of a real potential problem for us there. For example, if you do, in fact, I think I've got oh no, I'll come back to that in a second. If you've got a question on, again, I'm thinking of a history example. If you've got a source usefulness question in your, that's in one of your exam papers on Hitler's rise to power in the early 1930s, and students perform badly on that, you might infer from that students don't know Hitler's rise to power very well. Or you could infer from that students aren't very good at analysing the usefulness of sources. Or, again, you've got to contextualise the sources. It might be that they are good at analysing the usefulness of sources, but the particular sources that were given were challenging in some way. And if all we've got is a mark on a spreadsheet that we're analysing, we're not going to really dig into what the problems are. And we might make mistakes in terms of the inference that we draw about that question. There's also problems with the data that you're going to be given about your department by somebody else. You're going to get lots and lots of data about your department, probably from your school, and this might come in various forms. You might encounter the residual score, which attempts to compare your department with other departments in the school. And if you're a minus number, it means you're not doing quite as well compared to other departments with the same students. If you're a positive number, you're doing better than sort of the average department in your school with the same students. But that can be skewed quite heavily. If your school enters students for qualifications where large numbers of students do very well, again, less likely now, but sort of in the past, you have the sort of ECDL syndrome. You might find that skews your residuals quite a bit, and that might be unhelpful. You'll get lots of data by group, but again, this can be quite misleading and can often lead us to incorrect conclusions. Let's say, for example, you've got data that's comparing the achievement of your disadvantaged pupil premium students with the achievement of your non-disadvantaged pupil premium students. If the pupil premium students obviously are likely to be achieving less well than the non-pupil premium students, and you think, well, there's a big gap here, I need to sort something out with those disadvantaged students. I need to put in place an intervention for this group of students to get them up to the level of the non-disadvantaged students. I would always ask the question, are your non-disadvantaged students achieving as well as you'd want? Is the issue specific to those disadvantaged students, which is a really varied group of students? Not every disadvantaged student is by any means the same. The same goes with SEND pupils as well. If is the issue the pupil premium students and what's going on with them, or is the issue the teaching of the entire cohort? And would your best strategy for improving the achievement of the pupil premium students actually be to improve the teaching for the entire cohort? That might be, it doesn't sound intuitive necessarily to think about it that way, but probably that's, I would suggest, the most efficient strategy, particularly given the limits of the time that you've got to hand as a head of department. You haven't got hours and hours and hours focusing on what might be a very small group of students. That pupil premium group might be 10% of your cohort or 15% of your cohort. Actually, are you better just trying to do strategies that affect everyone and lift everybody up? And that saying that a rising tide carries all boats might be appropriate there. You've also got to think about as well, actually, whether your pupil premium students are achieving as well as your non-pupil premium students doesn't matter if they're still achieving below the national average. For non-disadvantaged students, that's one of the benchmarks that we are judged against in schools. You'll have comparisons with your national data. Fisher Family Trust data is quite a common one. This is what Fisher Family Trust says your department should have got with these students, and oh look, your department didn't quite make the grade here. But again, Fisher Family Trust data, and other people have spoken, sort of more with more sort of expertise on this than perhaps I can offer, with more knowledge of that process than perhaps I can offer. But Fisher Family Trust offers sort of probabilities of outcome. It offers a range of possible outcomes. And what often happens is that range of outcomes that FFT are offering is boiled down to one grade that you've got to get. Otherwise, you're negative for that student, which is, again, if the probability that the student was meant to get a grade 7 was only 40%, but that was the highest, and a grade 8 was 20% and a grade 6 was 30%, if they hit a grade 6, well, they were nearly as likely to get that as a grade 7. We've just got to be careful about the judgments that we make from that. And the other curious one is exam board information. I always find exam board information is really helpful. But often in schools, we're very slow to give this information out. And again, I don't think I've ever been to a school where someone set me up straight away with the exam board logins that I need to get onto the edXL website, so I can look at the national picture. What was the national average for particular scores? If my cohort of students doing a source usefulness question on the rise of the Nazis to power, if they averaged, 4 out of 8 on that, I might think, well, that's pretty mediocre. That's a bit disappointing. But if the national average was 3.5 out of 8, we've actually done probably quite a bit better than the national average overall. That might be more encouraging. Similarly, on another question, we might average, 6 out of 8 and be very confident that was good. But if the national average was 6.2 out of 8, we've just got to take on board these different things, and that can be a useful thing as well to be wary of. Tom Sherrington talks about this problem of the macro summative data tracking paradigm problem, which I like the phrase. And again, a lot of what I've talked about here involves the journey from the spreadsheet to the classroom. But as Tom says, the trouble with macro data tracking is that the journey from the spreadsheet to the classroom is circuitous at best and normally doesn't happen at all. All we are doing is generating data that might tell a story about student performance. It might at best give a picture of where students are, but it does nothing to take them further. Even here, the grades themselves do not actually tell us anything at all about what students know or can do. Literally nothing. So what are some other problems that we might find? Well, we often find that our data focuses on the end product. And I think the data that we have about process is not quite as good. Now, obviously, we're here hosted by Seneca Learn. I'm very grateful to them to give me this opportunity to speak, and to Flavia to speak, and obviously promoting the product. Actually, that is an interesting way, particularly with a lot of these electronic solutions that we've now had to deal with within lockdown. We can get information about how long students are spending on the electronic product that we've bought into, how many questions they're getting right. That might start to give us a bit more process data that might be quite useful. Some of the things that sort of frustrate me about this, lesson attendance is a classic one. I was a head of sixth form in a school a few years ago, and one of the tasks I had, which I found very difficult, was to try and identify what the attendance to lessons was. Not the session attendance that you have to report nationally as sort of part of your statutory reporting duties, but actually what the attendance to individual subject lessons was. And this is really difficult to get hold of, because often these things are coded incorrectly. If a student is in isolation for example, for that lesson. They may be marked as present, but they weren't in your classroom. They were probably doing some work that you shoved off to the isolation manager 5 minutes before in a bit of a rush, and they don't have some subject specialist expertise to help them access the work if they're even attempting it at all. If they're on a trip, they might be marked as present, but they're not in your lesson. So this is something I'd love for us to have better systems for dealing with, because I think that might be quite. I think that'd be quite eye-opening information if we actually could work out, and particularly for sixth form, where obviously in some schools, getting sixth formers into lessons itself, getting them out of bed in the morning, getting them into the lesson at 9 a.m. is sometimes a bit more of a challenge, where you don't have those kind of legal avenues that you can use to get them into school. You really are relying on goodwill a little bit more. A lot of us are required to input an effort grade, which attempts to, I think, again, identify some sort of process. But again, I think there's issues here with a lack of consistency. Is a student getting a 4 for effort in one subject? Is that the same as if they're getting a 4 for effort in another subject? Does that look similar? Do we have consistent standards? Often we put it in. It's something that the parent can understand. We don't do very much to quality assure any of that information. And particularly early in courses, when it's really too early to start making judgments on what kind of grade a student might be working towards, the effort grade might be kind of a useful indicator, and that I think we should pay more attention to. You're probably likely to be asked to input a predicted grade for a student. What do I think they're going to get in their GCSE history exam? You may also be asked to input a current grade. So let's say the GCSE exam is at the end of year 11. But here we are in the middle of year 10, and I've got to do my report, and I've got to say that what do I predict them to get, and what are they currently on? And I might predict that they're going to get a 7, but currently I think they're on a 5. Well, to me, this is made up numbers. A GCSE grade is designed to record the end of a course's achievement, not in the middle of a course's achievement. This was the problem with Key Stage 3 level, is that they became used to identify things in the middle of the course rather than at the end of the key stage. To me, this is really made up numbers. Some schools even, obviously bring these grades down into Key Stage 3, and they say, well, if we think a student would be a grade 7 at the end of year 11, their target at the end of year 8 is to be a grade 4 in GCSE geography. This is just absurd. I mean, they're not even studying the GCSE course. How can we do this? I know a lot of this a lot of this issue is being tackled, but if it's not, we need to keep up the work on that, because this is a lot of made up numbers, and we don't have the time as teachers to be wasting on this when we have the achievement of the students that we need to try and improve. Obviously, you'll get lots of mock exam opportunities potentially. Some schools maybe run 2 or 3 mock exams series in year 11. Okay, sometimes more isn't always better on this front, I think. And doing lots of mock exams isn't necessarily the best preparation for doing the final exams. And sometimes what we've got ourselves obsessed with is trying to get accurate data rather than working on improving the achievements of the students. Matthew Ben-Yohai, in banning GCSE grades before year 11, he talked about this example of a marathon runner. And if I'm on the couch and I want to train to be a marathon runner, I might warm up by doing a few 5-kilometer runs, and my coach might time me for my 5-kilometer run, and I ask, how have I done on my 5-kilometer run? How am I doing on my run? And the coach might say to me, well, 5 hours. And I don't understand what that means. And what the coach is saying, well, you've done 5 kilometers at this speed, and if we extrapolated that over a marathon, you'll have run a marathon in 5 hours. So you're on 5 hours. But I haven't run a marathon, so that's silly. And similarly, we probably shouldn't use GCSE grades to describe the achievement of students who haven't actually finished doing the GCSE. I'll try and rattle through quickly the last couple of points here, because I'm aware of the time. As a history teacher, obviously, I've used 100 words where 10 might suffice from time to time. Again, and time is a big issue here. How much data do we collect that we don't actually use? I think a lot of schools, and as head of department, I'm sure I continue to collect data I don't actually use. I ask teachers to spend their time inputting data that I then don't do anything with. This, to me, when time is possibly even more than money, the most precious resource in schools, seems to be a bit of a cardinal sin. Is the data that we're collecting already telling us things we actually know? If so, do we need to collect that data continuously? Again, we might do. I mean, there may, of course, be statutory obligations to do so, but we just need to ask the question. And again, Tom Sherrington, I think, asked this question, if all of our progress and attainment data was lost in a fire, our computer system was destroyed and all of our spreadsheets were gone, what impact would that really have? Would that impact on any students in any meaningful way? What things would we absolutely want to save that would impact on students the most? And I think we've got to ask that question, what would benefit the students versus what would benefit me in my role as a senior leader where I've got to present certain things, or me in my role as a middle leader where I've got to present certain things for my own self-interest. We want to be aligned on what meets the needs of the students there. And I think data can lead us to become quite blind to some of the problems sometimes. We can be so overwhelmed with data that we can start to value weighing things over actually charting a course of improvement, what Matthew Evans in the blog I referred to earlier calls mapping. We can become very obsessed with micro solutions, fixating on this small group of underachieving students rather than thinking on what we can do to improve the achievement of all of the students that we have in front of us. And that might come back to good old-fashioned quality first teaching and getting back to the core principles of that and making that as good as we can and making sure the behavior of our students is as good as it can be. And those things that we know have the biggest impact, more so than fixating on tiny groups and fussing around at the margins. We can also prioritize quantitative over qualitative data. The formal data over the informal data. As a classroom teacher, you will be collecting data on your students all the time. You won't be putting it in a spreadsheet. It'll be lodged up in here. You will know when you go around while your students are doing their little 5-question quiz at the start of the lesson. You won't record that necessarily, but you'll have a good idea as you're circulating. Oh, students couldn't do that particular question. Need to lodge that in the memory and come back to this particular topic. Or this student's just not attempting anything at all. I need to make sure I'm focusing on them over the next few days to make sure that they're improving their work as best as we can and engaging more with what we're doing. And why does this matter? Well, looking at the 2018 UK government report into factors affecting teacher retention, one of the factors of many that were cited as being a reason why teachers are leaving the profession in numbers that we cannot afford them to be leaving is that the exams and data-driven ethos is got too heavy, and we focused a lot more on the numbers than on the students and trying to improve our students and get our students to be successful. The needs of the data beast have become the priority more so than the needs of the students, the human beings that are in front of us. So what should we do? Well, as a classroom teacher, I think we need to think about the following terms. How does this data, that I have, that I've been given, mock exam results, for example, how does this data inform and affect my teaching of this class right now? How does this data inform and affect my teaching of this class in the future? And then how does this data inform and affect my teaching of future classes that I'm teaching the same stuff to? That was, I nicked that from Adam Boxer. I thought it was a very good way of thinking about this, a very focused way of thinking about data. And as a classroom teacher and as perhaps a new head of department, those are I think the core questions that we want to ask with a lot of the data that we have. What is it doing to affect what I'm doing in the classroom? As middle leaders, we need to think carefully about the data that we collect. Whether we use it, do we need to keep asking for it? Do we need to keep asking teachers to spend the time putting in this data onto our various spreadsheets or our various systems? Do we need to, instead of measuring all the time, try and chart a course for improvement with the data that we have? Referring back to Matthew's blog that I mentioned earlier, we need to avoid allowing the assessment tail to wag the curriculum dog. Having a really good curriculum is really important. Ensuring students are learning the best that we can get them to learn is vital. Then when we identify what that is, then we can devise our assessment. But I think too many times we put the assessment first and the curriculum second. And I don't think that's the right way around. We need to accept the inherent uncertainty in using data before we use it to form concrete judgments, especially about people. I think using numbers to judge people in the way that has been done in some places in the past has been harmful. And we need to try and avoid that where possible and try and look at things in the round. Data is very important. It's very interesting. It's very useful. It does not tell us everything that we need to know. I would really recommend Matthew Stanford's chapter in the Research Ed Guide to Leadership, which offers a really interesting way of thinking about assessment as on a whole school basis. And he's shout out to him because he's a historian as well. But that is a very good work to be looking at. What do I do? Well, I'm probably guilty and still am guilty of some of the sins I discuss above. I try as best as I can to slim down what I collect. I do have tracking sheets for each year group with the key pupil information on. I do ask teachers in the department just to input basic information about how students have done. And then I try to use that to inform my quality assurance of the department to try to ensure that we're reasonably consistent, particularly in Key Stage 3, where it's harder to almost be consistent because we don't have an external benchmark that we're working towards. And we use our data to try and keep a weather eye on those students. But what I want us to focus on is what we can do to improve everyone's achievements rather than maybe just a few underperformers. Because if I improve everyone's achievement, I'm hopefully going to catch those underperformers at the same time and lift them with me in most cases. Clearly, when there might be specific SEND needs, for example, I appreciate the need to address that specifically. Okay. That is me. I think I've just about kept to only being slightly over time. So I'll hand back to Flavia and any questions that people might have.
Hi, Kristian. Thank you so much. That was really
Hello.
great. There was lots of comments now in the end when you asked about what real impact would it have if all the data disappeared. So people really debating there. There are a few questions I'm going to ask you. If you still have questions that you haven't typed, now's the time. But I'm just going to take 20 seconds to show you the discount code before I forget. So I'm just going to share this just really quick. Yeah, there you go. So basically, this is the link that you will use. I'm going to post that here on the chat. And then that will take you to a form to book a call with my colleague Amelia. And then here, where it says any other questions, that's where you're going to type the code. And the code is Puzzle Forum Bike. Don't ask me why I got those questions, but that is the code. So just go on the website and type those 3 words, and then you will be able to get a discount from of Seneca Premium when you talk to Amelia. Okay, I'll show you that in the end as well, but let's go to the questions now with Kristian. So let me get my question book here. Right, so I think let's start with one of the last ones, but I think it was a very good one. I think the name is not real, but I'm gonna use the name that they have on YouTube. So they saying that we have no choice about the data processes because they are directed by the senior leadership or the whole Department of Education. So how can we influence that as middle leaders, I guess?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I'm not always the best person to speak about sometimes this because I can get a bit fired up about some of these issues, sometimes probably more than is necessary, and probably want to be a bit more diplomatic than I can be from time to time. I think all you can, I mean, look, it is very, very difficult, and it depends entirely on the nature of your school context. And, I'm sure, we're all aware that in some schools, leaders are really open-minded, really open to new ideas, really open to new suggestions, not precious about getting feedback from people beneath them in the hierarchy for ideas. And we know that in other schools, that is not quite always the case, and it's a bit more challenging, and you have to tread a bit more carefully. I think some things that you can do are to try to, at the very least, within your own department area, and again, timing's difficult because, workload is something, I've got 2 kids and I drive a lot, I've got a big drive to work and, want to see my family from time to time. So workload, something really matters to me. I don't want to overburden my colleagues with workload. But if I can at least start to bring some of the principles of good practice into what we're doing as a department and sort of advocate for that through line management meetings, through exam reviews in a polite and diplomatic way, that might be a way of getting some change, and trying to model good practice might be a way to get some change. Other things, I mean, I share things with my line manager. I'm probably annoying for sharing articles of things that I agree with my line manager. I've just got a new line manager because my last one's left to take a promoted position at another school. So I've got a new line manager this year, and she's probably already getting annoyed with me for forwarding, oh, this looks good, particularly where it's something where it might chart a different course from the one that my school might want to chart from time to time. And I know as a leader that can be awkward because you might agree with that, but you've got that kind of leadership. You've got to kind of have that united front as a leadership team, and I do appreciate that's a challenge as well. And not necessarily everything can be sort of open season, but I think keep yourself well read, keep yourself informed, about good practice, think about some of the works, that I've suggested, I found really useful and helped me to clarify things that I sort of thought, but I didn't really have any evidence. And now, these works, Adam Robbins' book is brilliant. The Research Ed Guide, I happen to have them both here. These two are very good, particularly for a middle leadership sort of level. If you're an aspiring middle leader, that one's very good. If you're an aspiring senior leader, that's probably a must read, I would suggest. Those have some really interesting thoughts, and where you can see successful schools, some of the most successful schools in the country are starting to chart a different course. I think that's pretty overwhelming evidence of a need to, perhaps if you're in a school that's not doing quite so well, to try and make some changes, and we'd be churlish not to learn from those. But I do appreciate schools can be very insular places and resistant to change in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm gonna share this one because it's here, but there was also the same question that was asked before by Jubril Suleiman. But I'm just gonna click on this one because it's easier. So the difference between, I guess, key stages where you have an exam, external exam, and the ones where you don't.
Yeah, so key stage 3. So obviously before the sort of Michael Gove reforms in English education, we used to have the levels, national curriculum levels. And then Michael Gove and the DFE at the time said, well, we're going to scrap all that. I actually think that was a really good move. I know it frightened a lot of people because we're so used to clinging onto numbers and to tell us how children are doing. But a lot of the numbers were a fiction that we were making. Again, we were using, it was getting ridiculous where we were sub-leveling. Children were a level 5A in the middle of year 8 in history or something. And it was just crazy for these descriptors that were quite short, that were designed to describe performance at the end of key stage 3. To answer the question, my school uses it's probably, I would argue, not dissimilar to old style key stage 3 levels. We just don't call them that. So we use things like, we have broader descriptors, of that they're working towards, expected, or they're working in greater depth. And we report on those, and we're sort of meant to put students into one of those groups. I've seen some schools, all they do is report test scores, for example. So they look at test scores. And now that on its own, I don't think is very helpful. What you do need to do, and I think this is one of the problems with some of the data practice, is particularly when you're reporting to parents, a lot of data is justified because it's like, well, we need to report it to parents. We need to tell parents how their children are doing. But when the parents get the information, they're none the wiser. And one of the reasons is that they have no benchmark for comparison. How do you, if my child is whatever level, well, what's the average for a child in that year group? Are they above average? Are they below average? If you've got no kind of ability to compare with some other benchmark, where do they rank in the class? Are they at the top of the class, the middle of the class, the bottom of the class? I think that's what a lot of parents kind of want to know, but a lot of the data that we give doesn't really tell them that. And the thing is, that's probably all we can say as well, reliably. There is no national benchmark for key stage 3 history or key stage 3 science or whatever. All we can do is kind of say, well, in this cohort of students that we have in our school, these ones are kind of towards the top end. These ones are sort of a bit lower. These ones are a bit lower. And these are kind of the ones that are really struggling. And that's probably all we can really say if we're going to try and number them. And as I say, some schools just give like, these are the assessment scores that they got. This was the average score on that assessment. So you might say, well, we got 50% on that assessment. That might look pretty bad. But if the average score was 44%, well, they were above average on that test. And there you're also telling them things that are certain. You probably can't say on that basis, well, they got 50% on that year 8 test. Therefore, I think at the end of year 11, they ought to be a grade 7 GCSE students. That's probably not a reliable inference that you can make. All you can say is, well, they got 50% on that test. And it was a bit above the average. And I think there's something to that clarity. I think a lot of the time we want to say things. We really want to say things. We want to say, well, put certain students with a certain label. It's not always just possible to do that. And we've got to be careful about doing things because they're desirable rather than whether they're or not they're actually possible. And I think this is key stage 3 data's had this problem for a long time. But again, a lot of schools have kind of clung to, well, levels have gone, but we really like having that system and it looks good on a spreadsheet. So redesign it, not call it that, but basically it will be that by the back door. So you do see that system persisting as well in some ways, and using these kind of criteria-based descriptors for the end of their course. I'm not so, I don't know if that's the best thing to do, really, in my opinion. But so it's a muddy playing field. There's a lot of different options out there. A very good person to read from a history perspective, but I think his work is applicable to a lot of domains, is Michael Fordham, whose Clio etc. blog has some good stuff on assessment in a world without levels that might be of interest to you as well. And Matthew Ben-Yohai, who I referenced earlier, is also very good on some of these issues as well. And they might provide, he's a science teacher in London, and he might provide as well. That might give you some more information.
Cool, great, excellent. So there are a few more questions, but we won't have time to cover them all. So I'm gonna ask this one, which it's not your case because history is a very classic subject, but there are new subjects, new courses coming up all the time, so we don't have that historical data available. So if you have any suggestions on that. I know it's not your case, but
when you're teaching a new subject, so I guess I don't know whether does this mean a new subject, like a new?
Yeah,
I saw
so
someone mention
they teach BTEC animal care.
Yes,
so
I saw that one. Right. Yes. So that so there's that. I wonder whether it was a subject they were new to, if you like.
No, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's really. I think what I would do is, I mean, again, you've got to come back to the basic principles. What do you want them to know or be able to do in your subject? Right. So what are the things that you would expect students to know in your subject? And then you have to design some sort of way of probably trying to test that. Now, as I said earlier in my presentation, assessment design is a difficult thing to do because, to have good assessment, there's sort of various principles around reliability and validity and generalization and so on and so forth. Again, the Adam Robbins book explains those principles really clearly. So doing that is not an easy task, and I would certainly recommend reaching out to other colleagues, nationally. And social media has been brilliant for networking in a lot of subjects, and it might well be that networking through other schools, maybe via Twitter or Facebook, has lots of groups for all sorts of courses like this, and seeing what other people do and trying to club together. And then the next thing, of course, is the other challenge you have is you might have very small groups. So if you've only got a very small sample size of data, that's also a problem, because then again, that could be very, very noisy. So if you can work with, again, other providers and other people that you might know who are teaching that course, you might be able to club together on some joint assessments and at least start to get a bit of a bigger sample, so you can make a more meaningful inference about any data that you collect. But I think, try and network with other people if you can. Break out of your silo if you can. Not easy to do, I appreciate. Perhaps go back to the exam board and see, do they know of any other contacts for that subject? Might be a good thing to do, and they might have networking opportunities. And then secondly, you want to really just come back to that. What do I want the students to know about this thing that I'm teaching? And can I test, even if it's just a simple multiple choice quiz, knowledge test, that can in itself be a useful exercise to do on a basic level, and might give you some quite interesting information. But obviously you've got to be able to qualify that and say, well, it might not tell you everything you want to know. It will just tell you some of the things you might want to know, would be my suggestion there.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. So there are some more questions that are popping up here. This one we're not going to cover now, but you can send me that later, and then I'll forward to everybody who
I did. If you follow me on Twitter, I did the other day do a little thread of some of the quotes, and I sort of just plastered them onto some tweets and linked in the various people, although not necessarily their blogs. But yes, I'll certainly send that through as well. But if you dig back the last couple of days on my Twitter, you'll probably find some of those links again, and I can link to some of the other things that I found useful as well, that have kind of, even if I've not mentioned directly, have sort of informed my thinking around this issue.
Okay. Brilliant. So final questions, because we're already a bit over time here. But I think because you're talking a lot about being a head of department. So if somebody who's going to become one or has just become one, so what would be the first thing to look into if you want to improve how your department handles data?
Well, you've got to kind of, I guess, evaluate what you've got at the moment. And you've got to kind of, again, it's kind of, what do you want to know? and what does the information tell you that you have right now? And if there's a misalignment around that, then obviously that probably identifies something that you want to collect. I mean, I'll talk about a case in point. When I took on the department I'm running at the moment, and I found that we had some issues around the data in the department, particularly in terms of things like we had a big problem because our teachers were over predicting. So we were predicting the students would do this, and then when the exams came in, they did that, and obviously that's not great. I'd always rather predict they're going to do that and then they actually do that. That's much nicer on the August results days. And so we had to have a look at, well, why might that be the case? What might lead people to think that they're an 8, the student's an 8, and then they get a 6, consistently. And one of the things I found was that the mock exams we were using weren't great. So we were because again, this is a history specific example, and I'm sure it's replicable to other things. So we have different topics that we do. So we might have the American West as a topic, and Weimar and Nazi Germany as a topic, and medicine through time as a topic. And so I generally think it's better we'll set them the medicine paper, and then set them the Germany paper and do some big, robust assessments like that are linked to exactly what the exam board do. What we found was we were having students go, you're going to have a question on medicine, and then you have a question on the American West, and you'll have a question on Germany as part of one paper, and we'll give you an idea of what the topic is going to be for those questions. And so what students would do is they would revise for that specific topic. The problem is that they're not there's a forgetting, I think, that a mock exam tests only a small sample of the domain of knowledge. And if you do that approach, you're not getting the students to actually learn the domain of knowledge. You're just getting them to learn a tiny sample of the knowledge, and that doesn't prepare them properly for the final exam. So I think when you're testing, when you're again coming up with those assessments, think about the fact that you taught them this big domain of knowledge, and your assessments inevitably will only probably, particularly big summative mock exam style assessments, will only ever test a small sample of that knowledge. So and therefore you've got to be very careful about the inferences you draw from that. So I think evaluate what's going on, and also again, what are other departments doing, particularly successful departments? Do try and look around at what are your successful heads of department, what sort of things are they doing, what are sort of related departments doing? Again, if you're a history teacher, what is the geography or the RE or the English department doing? You should, I think a good school, your head of departments need to be a real engine room of improvement. You really want a good tight knit team of heads of department. They really help to drive what's going on the ground. And so as a new head of department, I'd hope that you're being inducted into that team of heads of department, and that there's real collaboration and sharing between those people, so that those with more experience can help those perhaps like yourself who might have a bit less in this difficult area. And if you're looking to take a head of department role, if you're a mid, I would get in there with the head of your subject and try and see if they will let you have a look at some of the data, and have a look at some of the exam review type of stuff, and just play around with it and mess around with it. You might have access to a lot of the same information that they've got. Just spend time trying to familiarize yourself with the terms, ask questions. What does that mean? What does this mean? So that you are confident, because guaranteed you will get that as a task to do on interview. There's absolutely no question about that at all. And, particularly in a wordy subject like mine, you can make yourself look quite good by showing you can actually interrogate some numbers and not just write essays all the time and sort of talk too much like I do. So, that's always a useful thing. So if you're a maths teacher, that might be hard, because probably all your competition's probably good at it as well. So that might be a bit more difficult, I suppose.
Cool. No, that was all excellent. We have to go now because it's already 7:10.
I understand.
Thank you so much. There were other questions. So if we didn't have time for your questions, just go on Twitter and tag him. And I'm sure he'll be happy to answer and keep the conversation going.
Sure.
So
I might have to help put my kids to bed first, but yes, I will get to them if my wife will be desperately looking for me to come and tag in. I think now, having done dinner time, so I'll be doing bedtime. So looking forward to that.
So,
but yes, please do ask on Twitter. That'd be great.
Yeah, that would be great. So let's all keep in touch and email me. I'll send an email to everybody with all the reading list and the link to watch this talk again, and the code for the discount, and all the Twitter links and everything. So thank you so much for joining and watching, and thank you, Kristian. It was excellent. It was really, really insightful. Lots of people.
Sorry, I've just seen as well. Someone said I'm a dinosaur and I don't have Twitter. I don't know. I might be able. I might be willing to share an email address, perhaps, with yourself, Flavia. I'm happy if anybody wants to get in touch that way. I have a sort of professional, non-work but professional account. People
Okay.
want to
Yeah, we can
drop
do
me a
that.
line. That's fine as well.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay, so thank you everybody. Have a good evening and keep in touch.
Thank
See
you.
you later. Bye,
Bye
Kristian.
bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks.